So the first thing we're gonna do is read, first we're gonna do a review and then we'll read the passage. So we're looking back in Christ's ministry. In your book it says his first year of ministry. And maybe it is, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's less than that. Maybe it's more than that. Sometimes the feast that Jesus is going to isn't named. And I'm going to talk about that today, that we can't know for sure what feast it was. There are a number of feasts in Judaism that if it's not named, if it just says it's the feast of the Jews, then we've got a number of them to pick from. We can't know for sure which one it is. So, but we do know that we've talked about these things. So Christ's cleansing of the temple, and his meeting with Nicodemus, and then his meeting with the woman at the well in Samaria, and then he healed a nobleman's son. So this is the portion of John that we're going to talk about now. So after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem a sheep gate, by the sheep gate, a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda. I think it's really important that we see this little word in the second paragraph, the third word. What is the third word in the second part of that? The longer part. What's the second word? Third word, I'm sorry. Third word. Now there is. So when this was written, the pool was intact and still in use. There are some people who say that the books of the New Testament were written long after Jesus died. That is not true. And next year you'll learn a lot more about that. It is not true. Everything in the New Testament was written in the first century. Some of what John wrote was written late in the first century, but all of it was written in the first century. And so John, by the time John was writing his gospel, it was there, right? So it was currently there and operating. So now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him there, lying there, and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm going down, another steps down before me." Jesus, so I find that answer very interesting. Jesus' question was, "Do you want to be healed?" And how does he answer? What does he say? Well, yeah, Jesus said, "Do you want to be healed?" And how does he answer that question? What does he say? Yeah, I can't, because nobody. Is that an answer to the question, do you want to be healed? No. I would think that he would say, yes, I think this tells us something about the man. I'm not sure what that is. But I would imagine if that was me, I'd say yes. If somebody said to me, "Hey, do you want both of your knees to be healed so they're not hurting you all the time?" I wouldn't say, "Well, you see, I had problems with my knees for a long time." No, I would say, "Yes, please heal me." But he doesn't, which is interesting. He gives an excuse instead. So now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed, to carry your mat." But he answered them, The man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. They asked him, who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? Now the man who had been healed did not know it was who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn as there was a crowd in the place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. That's an interesting thing for him to say as well. And the man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered him, my Father is working until now, and I am working. This is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, meaning Jesus, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So we have this passage and about this man, but we need to look back a little bit because John omits some things that the Synoptic Gospels talk about. Now remember, he has a very specific thing that he's trying to do, a very specific thesis statement. These were written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. And so he is hand-picking the stories about Jesus. The good news is that we can fill in some of what happened in the meantime with the Synoptic Gospels, with Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So I want to start with this first verse. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So we see those two words, after this, several times in John. And every time we see those two words, after this, in the Gospel of John, a certain amount of time has elapsed. This is not happening right after what we talked about with him going to Galilee and going to Cana. It's not right after. It's during a feast, but it's not right after. Now, does it tell us in the scripture which feast it is? Because there are a lot of feasts of the Jews. So your curriculum says it's Passover, and it may have been Passover, and a whole year might have elapsed. That's true. But we can't know that for sure, and I'm not going to tell you that I know something for sure that I don't know for sure. So it might have been the Feast of Lights, it might have been Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. We don't know for sure. What we do know is that some time had elapsed. And so the records of Matthew and Mark and Luke kind of tell us a little bit more about what Jesus has done. And he was in Cana and went to Nazareth, and the people rejected him there. This is you can barely see it, but where those clouds are back there, that's where the Sea of Galilee is. Actually, along the side of the lake, the sea, are places that Jesus went to, including Cana and in Galilee. You can see that there, and you can see Nazareth there. And they're tracing his steps. I'm not sure that we can know for sure where he went, because it doesn't tell us in John, but he does end up going to Jerusalem for a feast. All adult males were required to go to the feasts. And so Jesus, along with his disciples, would have gone to all of those feasts. So let's fill in a few of these gaps. I don't know. So he went to Cana in Nazareth, and And he was rejected in his own hometown in Nazareth, and because they all knew him, and so they took him for granted. They watched him grow up. I don't know if you've experienced this. You might experience it. That people who have known you for all your life tend to see you perpetually as a kid, at least for a long time. And sometimes they're shocked when you do something outstanding, or they're less likely. You need to just. Whose book is that? That's not what I'm asking. Whose book is that? This? You've got 2 books. And they see you as that little kid still, even after you're grown. And that might be part of Jesus's issue going back to Nazareth. This is the kid that, he's just a carpenter. He's not anything. He's just, not an important person. And then at one point, the people got so angry at him that they tried to throw him off a cliff, but he walked right through them. Don't know if that was a miracle or not, but they weren't able to do that, obviously. So he heals Peter's mother-in-law. He heals several other people in Capernaum in Galilee, and then he at some point leaves and goes to Jerusalem. And that is where this story takes place, in Jerusalem, at the Passover. So this incident took place near the sheep gate. That it tells us that, right? Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda. So this is a kind of a general map of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem had a wall, and it had a number of gates. And some of those gates, we know exactly what gate it was. But some of them, we don't. And we do know that, we don't know for sure where the sheep gate was. What we do know is it was by the pool of Bethesda. So it could have been there, or it could have been there, one or the other. But it was the gate that the sheep would be herded into when they were going to sacrifice at the temple. And in fact, it was the gate that Jesus went out of to go to Golgotha. The Lamb of God walked out of that same gate. And there's 12 gates in all into the city of Jerusalem. So it's called Bethesda, and you want to write this down. It's called Bethesda, and Bethesda means house of mercy. House of mercy. And the pool had a structure built over it to protect it from the elements. So the people who were lame and sickly that would come to the pool hoping to get their ailments cured would sit there and wait for the water to be stirred by the spring so that they could get into the pool. And these are the remains of the pool. This is what it looks like today. And part of this is the pool, and part of it is churches that were built over the pool. And what would happen is that a church would be built, and enemies would come and would destroy or partially destroy those churches, and then they would just build another church, and then it would get destroyed, and the same thing would happen. So, for example, in 1888, while the Church of St. Anne, which was built over the pool, was being repaired, they found this reservoir of water. It was discovered, and on the wall there was a faded carving of an angel stirring up the water, indicating that they had found the ancient pool of Bethesda. And you can see here remnants of the pool and of the churches built above it. This is the spring that fed the pool of Bethesda. And so you can go there and visit it. The pool was cut out of solid rock. It was 55 feet long and 12 feet wide. And it was approachable by a flight of steps that wound steeply to the water. And the pool was filled with water that came from this Gihon spring, Gihon spring that's nearby. And it would gush unpredictably at unpredictable intervals. It's not like Old Faithful, and Old Faithful actually is slowing down too. That they know that just about every hour it's going to gush, but this was intermittent. They didn't know when it would gush, but whenever it did gush, the people that were lying around the pool wanting to be healed would try and get into the pool. And I'm not sure if everyone who got in the pool. The curriculum kind of says that everyone who got in the pool while it was being, stirred around, was healed. But my understanding is it was just the first person. So it was like a competition to get in there first. I don't know for sure which is right because your curriculum says one thing and I read another. But I don't know if that was just a belief and nobody had ever been, like maybe people made stories up about it and so other people believed it. I don't know that anyone was ever actually healed in that pool, but it's possible. There's some reason why people began to believe that was a way to get healed. So it became a gathering place for people that were blind or were lame or whatever else it was, and it really revealed some spiritual ignorance that could help them. So there are a myriad of churches and memorials that mark the spot. Some older, some newer. So let's talk a little bit about the meaning of the incident. The thing I want you to remember about this, the meaning is that it reveals the grace and mercy of God. When the lame man told Christ his plight, Jesus didn't rebuke him for his spiritual ignorance. That scream can't help you. He revealed his own power and his own compassion and his own deity by healing the man. He didn't need an angel to trouble the water. He needed Jesus. That's all he needed. And in truth, it's all any of us. So, like every other story we've talked about in John writes this story for the same reason he writes every story in John. These were written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and by believing you might have life in his name. And so, what do we see about Jesus? What does this tell us about Jesus? So first of all, this is something only God can do. Healing a man who is not able to use his hands or his feet. He's a quadriplegic, is what we would call him. Nobody can fix that. Nobody can make that right. And only Jesus can, and only God can do that. And so we see again that Jesus is God. And that's what John is trying to let us know. And he chooses the stories he tells so that it shows that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Only God can do this. So the reason Jesus can do this is because he is God. Now let's talk about the condition of the man. I don't know why they use the word impotent, but the word literally means powerless or weak, and he is. He is unable to use his hands and feet, and so he had no way of getting himself into the water. Now, it also says he was blind. I don't think he was spiritually or physically blind, but he was spiritually blind. He didn't know. He didn't know that Jesus could help him, and he didn't understand the truth of how he could be. Now, we use this word halt, which is a word that isn't used very often. We usually think of it as like halt, stop. But it can also mean enable. And so he was crippled, he was lame, he was not able to walk or to have full use of his hands and his legs. And people went to Jerusalem. Thousands of people would go to Jerusalem to go to this pool to try and be healed, but it didn't work without Jesus. So he was also withered. That word describes his paralyzed hands. He couldn't even pull himself into the water. He was unable to use both his hands and his feet. It says here that his hands symbolize, his feet symbolize going, and his hands symbolize doing. And the man could neither go to the pool nor could he do anything for himself. And that's true. But he didn't need the pool; he needed Jesus. And then he was waiting. Waiting for someone to help him into the pool. And Israel had been waiting for thousands of years for their Messiah. And when he shows up, they didn't recognize him. They're still waiting. Some are. Most that I know have given up on the idea of an actual Messiah and just say, we need to be the Messiah. We need to save the world. But he's waiting, much like Israel was waiting for their king, and they didn't recognize him. And that's the next thing. They didn't see who he really was. When Messiah came, they didn't recognize him. And what a tragedy that is. But here's the thing. It happens all the time. Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the King of the universe. But most people don't recognize that. Most people don't get it, don't understand it. And it's our job and our privilege to tell them. How are they going to come to know? Unless they're told about Jesus. Unless we tell them. Paul talks about that too. We are to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And then he's needing help. He's helpless, and so he needs help. But the same is true, not physically, but spiritually, with millions and billions of people. They need help. And they have no one to tell them where they can find help, where they can find wholeness, where they can find salvation. And I think at least the church in America is, I want to say crippled, because they refuse to tell people. God put us on the planet to show, to help people come to know Jesus. And by and large, we don't do that. And Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel. And are we doing that? Are we telling people who don't know Jesus about Jesus? And even this man, when he's asked who healed him, he kind of backs off, doesn't he? He doesn't say it was Jesus. He didn't really even know his name, or he pretended not to know his name. People need to know Jesus. So who's going to tell him? Who's going to tell him about Jesus? And Jesus tells us that's our job, to tell them about Jesus. So we're going to stop here before the next big thing, and we'll finish this up tomorrow, and you'll take your quiz, and you will have quite a bit of time to study for your test. Okay. The verse quiz is on the 14th. This you've already done. That's you've already done. Your unit test is next week. I need to write that. It's Thursday of next. No, it's Wednesday of next week. Wednesday. We'll be done with this pretty soon. So